Three orphans helped a rich rancher fix his wagon wheel. Next day a covered wagon pulled up. Dust rose in nervous spirals across the Arizona Territory, 1885, as three orphans pushed along a cut-banked trail. Coats patched and feet sore. Caleb, 14, moved like a scout. Sarah, 12, carried a canvas sack of needles, twine, and stale bread. Ben, 10, guarded a dented lantern as thunder stitched the sky shut. They were late returning to St. Joseph's Home for Children in Silver Creek, where Sister Agnes stretched every coin in prayer. Wind sharpened. The first cold drops struck like thrown pebbles. Around a bend, a wagon leaned at a cruel angle, one wheel split to the hub. Beside it stood William Hawthorne, broad shoulders, black coat soaked, beard graying, a name every trader knew, master of Ironwood Ranch. Rider of prize stallions, bearer of handcrafted saddles meant to win a cavalry contract at dawn. Wealth could not lift the axle. Time bled away. Mud swallowed his boots. He looked up and saw them, three road-worn children staring at ruin without fear. Caleb stepped forward. Sarah crouched, measuring spokes by eye. Ben gathered mesquite limbs in fast, jittering fists. William hesitated, pride fighting panic, then gave ground. They worked while lightning crawled over distant ridges, binding splinters with leather strips in prayer-strong knots. The makeshift wheel groaned, then held. William reached for coin. Caleb refused, voice steady. We help because we were helped. Silence widened between them, brave, clean, impossible to price. The storm hammered on. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, a lone bell rang. William's gaze drifted toward it, thoughtful, unsettled. He did not know that a covered wagon would roll into Silver Creek at first light, carrying a secret tied to his dead wife, a ledger nobody had balanced, and three names written where no child expects mercy. At dawn, destinies pivoted. What followed would reorder every heart in town. Arizona Territory. 1885. Wind slid over low hills, combing chaparral until dry leaves hissed. Dust lifted from ruts and curled around sun-bleached stones. Mesquite reached into a sky darkening at the edges, as if ink spread through wet paper. Thunder muttered in the west and gathered itself again. The scent of creosote rose, a sure sign that rain would soon sweep the country. Ravens rode the gusts. A shallow wash glittered where the first scattered drops spotted the ground and cooled the stored heat. William Hawthorne guided a team along that track with the care of a man who calculates before speaking. 50, broad-shouldered and used to days, he carried grief like a coat he never took off. 7 winters earlier, fever took Clara and left a silence at his table no account could fill. He answered loss with work. One rented pasture became several, then many. A string of sturdy mares and proven studs turned into a breeding program praised from Tucson to Prescott. He fenced land, hired hands, paid debts, and put Ironwood Ranch on every buyer's tongue. Wealth arrived in practical forms: sound fences, full barns, ledgers filled with black ink before winter. It did not soften evenings. William ate alone and rose before dawn. A larger prize drew him now. Territorial officials would soon choose a supplier for cavalry mounts, and the contract promised guaranteed money and a reputation that outlasted drought. He meant to argue with proof, not promises. The wagon behind him carried masterwork: saddles cut clean, skirts even, conchos polished, bridles wrapped in oiled cloth, cinches even, breast collars rolled, 2 canvas bundles of tools and spare buckle. The road to Silver Creek ran 15 miles over hard pan and shallow crossings that storms remade every year. Clouds stacked into dark mesas and wind carried grit that ticked against the wagon box. The team leaned into their collars with patient faith. William counted time in his head. If he kept a steady trot he could reach town by sundown, stable the horses, lock the cargo in the livery yard, and sleep a few hours before the morning meeting. He touched the inside pocket where Clara's photograph rode, the paper thinned by years of handling. A crack jumped from the rear left wheel as crisp as a rifle shot. The wagon lurched and dragged. Bridles swung, nails slid and rang along the boards. William set the brake and hauled the team to a halt. The horses planted and blew, ears tipping back for a cue. He climbed down into clay, just beginning to let go under fat drops that darkened the dust. The rim had split along the grain, 2 spokes were fractured at the hub. Hairline checks marked the fellow and hinted at worse if weight returned too soon. He respected wheels enough to hold his temper and kept his boot from kicking wood that could not answer back. A wheelwright could patch a section with heat, pegs and skill, but not here on a wind-scoured track with rain building. He inventoried options. He might unload part of the cargo, hide it in brush and return with a crew if the contract went well. Thieves watched roads during storms, and leather sold quickly. He could bind the rim with rawhide, yet he carried only finished straps, short and stiff for this use. He considered limping forward on 3 wheels and a prayer, but the axle would twist, the hub would tear and his losses would deepen. Each path bled time he did not have. He breathed, counted and let frustration rise and pass. Then he checked the team. Good stock forgives human error when hands stay light and voice stays steady. He stroked a neck and felt muscle relax under wet hide. The calm worked through him. He unlashed a saddle to ease pressure on the brake and set it beneath the wagon to keep the leather dry. A bell carried thinly from town. He thought of St. Joseph's Home for Children in Silver Creek, where Sister Agnes stretched soap, bread and patience past reason. He had sent a load of hay once when a traveling priest asked, but he never visited. Rooms that smelled of lie and effort made grief sit too close. He pushed the memory aside and did his sums again. 15 miles in thickening weather felt longer with every minute. The meeting would not wait on him, and officials rarely liked men who arrived wind-blown and late. Movement on the trail behind him drew his eye. 3 figures came on foot, steady and sure, walking the way people do when miles are constant. Caleb led, 14, lean, watchful, scanning ground and horizon in one practiced sweep. Sarah kept pace on his left, hugging a canvas sack that clinked with each step, the signature music of small tools and useful things. Ben, 10, carried a dented lantern and a coil of twine, energy held in check by his brother's pace. Their coats were patched, boots thin, faces set by duty and weather. They had earned coins that day for Sister Agnes by sweeping the store porch, stacking flour sacks at the mill, and delivering a letter for the schoolmistress, who paid with ginger cookies and a smile that reached her eye. The sack held needles, coarse thread, lye soap, salve, a short roll of leather, and 2 iron hooks to steady the kitchen stove door. They had hoped to beat the rain but misjudged the sky the way children do when work delays the start home. The lantern bobbed with Ben's steps like a tethered star. William measured them with the caution of a man who guards time and cargo. He expected a request, perhaps a plea for a ride. Instead he saw practiced attention. Caleb's gaze went to the team first, reading ears, shoulders and stance as a hand reads wire for strain. Sarah's eyes settled on the broken circle and then skipped to the wagon bed, where leather promised lashings. Ben studied mesquite and weighed straight limbs by eye. They did not crowd him, they did not talk over each other. They took in what mattered. He greeted them evenly and explained what failed and how far he needed to go. He did not say how much the delay threatened his plan. Caleb listened without interruption. When he spoke, his questions cut to the useful weight of the load, distance to town, spare wood, straps, nails, time left before dark. Sarah knelt in the wet, thumbed the split, pressed along the fellow, and glanced toward the sack as if counting what it held. Ben stood quiet, energy braked by a small nod from his brother that said wait. The wind freshened, rain ticked on the wagon boards, light dimmed another shade. Pride urged William to wave them on. Sense told him 3 pairs of hands could shorten trouble and salvage the evening. He thought of Clara's photograph, the habit it represented, the way it reminded him to be exacting but not hard. A different decision rose beside the business one. Accept help if it came honest, and repay it in a form that could not be tallied in a ledger. He stepped aside to give the children room to think. The children reached the wagon's shadow and stopped at a respectful distance, eyes on the wheel that held every mile to Silver Creek. They offered no solutions and asked for no coin. They had simply arrived, carrying a day's work in a sack in a calm the storm could not wash away. In the next minutes they and the rancher would decide whether strangers could make common cause against weather, distance and time. The sky lowered. The balance tipped toward an encounter. Rain came as a fine mist that turned dust to paste. Caleb lifted his hand, voice firm but polite. "Sir, We can help if you'll let us. He stopped a few paces off, giving the team room. Sarah shifted the canvas sack and studied the ruined wheel. Ben set their dented lantern on a flat stone and shielded the flame. William Hawthorne turned, weighing them as he would a deal that might cost more than it paid. This needs a smith, William said. A hoop, heat, hours. Caleb nodded. True, he answered, but we might brace the spokes and bind the rim enough to reach town. Pride told William to dismiss the idea. Urgency pressed. He looked at the dark western sky and let out a breath. All right, he said. Try. Caleb's tone turned brisk now. Ben, 2 straight limbs without knots, elbow to wrist length, he said, tapping his arm to mark it. Sarah, cut leather into laces and ready the awl. Sir, shift the saddles forward to ease strain on this corner. William obeyed before he realized it, sliding 2 saddles toward the wagon middle and lifting bridle bundles higher. The load settled a finger's width. Sarah knelt in the wagon's lee. From the sack she drew an awl, needles, coarse thread, a small hammer and a short roll of leather. She sliced the roll into narrow laces with a knife sharpened so fine it whispered through the hide. She braided 2 laces into one thicker strand, tugged the braid against her forearm to test it, then made several more. Ben jogged to a mesquite clump, choosing branches by sight and feel, returning with 2 straight lengths and a spare. Caleb examined the spokes, tested flex with a cautious lift, and slid one branch between 2 cracked roots as an inner splint. He set the second along the outside rim so the break would close under tension. Holes here and here, he said. Sarah placed the awl in his hand. He drove it through leather and wood, then tapped each puncture clean. William braced the wheel while the boy worked. Rain ticked harder. The team sidestepped, then settled at William's low murmur. Caleb threaded a lace across the break, set another in across, pulled them snug, and tied flat knots that would not slip. Sarah leaned her weight into the bind until the split closed. Ben cupped the lantern, shoulders square against the wind. Rebalance the cargo, Sarah said. Less weight buys distance. William shifted bridles and tool bundles toward center line. Caleb checked the hub, snugged one tie until it sang, and added a loop around the spoke feet. He hummed a soft line that steadied his hands. The bind settled, leather dark with rain, wood quiet under strain. Where did you learn this? William asked, curiosity rising. At St. Joseph's we fix what breaks. Caleb said. Sister Agnes says patience is cheaper than nails. Sarah smiled. She says kindness travels farther than a horse. Ben added, almost under his breath. And people last longer than coin. William felt a small heat move in his chest. Caleb pressed the rim, waited, then nodded. That will hold it a walk, he said. No jolts if we can help it. William lifted the brake and spoke to the team. The wagon eased forward 1 yard. Caleb's hand rose and William stopped. The boy crouched, watched water line the leather and touched the knot. The laces settled and went still. Good, he said. We can go. I'll ride back with Sarah. Ben will keep light on the bind. Sir, if you stay to the firm side, we can tighten if it stretches. They climbed into the bed. Sarah took a place by the wheel, a leather tail coiled in her palm. Ben set the lantern so its beam struck the cross ties and hub. Caleb braced between crates. William gathered the reins. The team leaned, grateful to move. The repaired wheel groaned once, then turned in a steady rhythm that sounded like relief. For the first minutes they rode with short checks. Still tight. Sarah called. Clear, Ben. Shallow rut. Caleb warned, and William steered around it. Rain fell in veils. Wet earth rose, leather scented the air. You wouldn't take money, William said, eyes on the track. Why? Because someone once helped us. Caleb replied. When our mother died, Sister found room for 3 plates when there wasn't enough stew. We can't pay her back in dollars, so we try to pass the help forward. Sarah added. Grace grows when it changes hands. Ben went quiet. A rut tugged the repaired side. William slowed, listening. The wheel's tone stayed even. At the wash they paused. Caleb snugged one tie a finger's width. Sarah brushed grit from a knot. Ben shifted the lantern and grinned at the smooth pull across the leather. Holding, he announced. They moved. Lights from Silver Creek flickered faint through the rain. William's skepticism thinned into admiration. He had built Ironwood Ranch by buying skill and demanding results. This was a different kind, the kind that worked without complaint and asked nothing. It steadied him inside. A thought rose before he could push it down. He wanted to know these children past this hour. "What will you do with your earnings?" he asked. "Soap, needles, salve, hooks for the stove," Sarah answered, patting the sack. "And lie for laundry if sister can spare water." Ben added, "Maybe candles." Then looked at Caleb, who gave a small nod. William faced forward and felt something loosen. They crested a rise. The town lay ahead, lamps blurred by rain. Time pressed, but now it carried another weight beside ledgers and signatures. 3 small acts done with care. William said, "When we reach the street, I'll take you to St. Joseph's before I stable the team," and heard a tone he had not used since Clara was alive. They rode the last mile at a careful walk. The wheel turned. The bindings held. Ben kept the lantern steady even when a gust tried to steal it. Sarah watched the knots like a seamstress guarding her best stitch. Caleb met William's glance, and returned a brief level nod. The rancher nodded back. At the edge of town he drew rein and let the horses breathe. "I misjudged you," he said. "This looked beyond you." "It wasn't." Caleb shrugged. "We learned to try," he answered. "If a thing can be mended enough to reach help, we ought to try," Sarah said. "And even if it fails, we can still be decent." Ben's smile flashed like a match cupped against wind. A bell tolled ahead. William felt the sound settle beside another. Leather pulled tight by small sure hands in the rain. He clicked his tongue and the team stepped on. The road to the livery and the government office forked from the road to St. Joseph's. For once he did not weigh which path paid more. He turned toward the orphanage first, newly sure that what these children had shown him would outlast any contract. Have you ever been helped by a stranger when you needed it most? Share your story below to inspire others. Rain thickened until the horizon turned to a single gray band, yet the children did not falter. Caleb planted himself beside the broken wheel and spoke with workman calm. "Sir, keep the team easy. We'll brace the rim and close the split." William stepped to the horses, palm long on a wet neck, voice low. The animals steadied, ears flicking. Tools clicked in Sarah's canvas sack. The smell of wet leather rose, mixing with rain until breath felt heavier with each inhale tonight. Sarah unrolled a short strip of leather and cut narrow laces with even strokes, each the same width. She braided 2 at a time to thicken the cord and hauled each finished length against her forearm to test its strength. Ben crouched near the hub, lantern cupped from wind. Caleb studied the fracture, and set one limb outside the split and one inside the circle as opposing splints. He tapped both into place with the hammer's rounded face, then leaned his shoulder into the rim until the gap closed. "Here," he told William. The rancher replaced him without bristling. Metal thrummed faintly under rain. Caleb listened for a steady note and nodded. "Holes," he said. Caleb bored paired holes through leather and wood. Sarah followed with braided laces, threading them flat across the break, her fingers moving with a seamstress's economy. "Cross, then cap," she said. Caleb pulled until the leather sang, tapped each knot with the hammer's peen, and checked for slip with 2 firm tugs. "Shift weight forward," Caleb said. William climbed into the box and moved 2 saddles toward center line so the repaired side would carry less strain. Leather whispered against leather. When he returned, Sarah had begun a ring of bindings, spacing each set by the width of her hand. The wheel lost its sway. "Again," Caleb said. They repeated the pattern until a collar of dark ties cinched wood and metal into agreement. They looked like a modest shop around a single urgent task. Caleb watched angles and timing. Sarah tied knots that would not slip and trimmed ends level with the seam. Ben kept the lantern steady and the splints ready, scanning brush for replacements before anyone asked. Their coats were patched, boots thin, faces earnest. William felt a second measure take root. Competence that does not boast, and simply holds. "Break," Caleb said. William said it. "Release on 3. The wheel rolled a hand's width, caught in the leather's grip, and settled into stillness. Caleb pressed the rim with both thumbs, listening the way a breaker listens to cable under strain. Again, William eased the team. The groan changed to a low, confident grind, the sound of 2 materials deciding to cooperate. Sarah smiled with one corner of her mouth. Ben nodded as if he had expected success from the start. They tested at a careful walk. Caleb held position by the hub, eyes on rotation. Sarah ran her palm along the ties, feeling temperature and tension. Ben trotted the far side, lantern lifted so the flame threw light through rain like threads of glass. After 30 yards Caleb called for a halt, snugged 2 knots by a hair, and wiped grit from the braid. We can reach town if we keep a steady pace and avoid ruts. If something loosens, stop and we tighten. I'll obey, William answered, surprised to hear humor in his own voice. He had ordered men for years with less ease than he now accepted from a boy. Rain tapped his hat brim. The repaired wheel spoke in small creaks that reassured rather than warned. He looked at the 3 of them and saw not charity but craft. The thought steadied him, as if his habits were tense in wind and someone had driven the right stake. At a shallow wash Caleb signaled another pause. Sarah checked every knot, then added a safety wrap across the main cross. Ben dipped the lantern, shielding the flame from a gust. Still bright, he reported. Caleb touched the hub, waited for warmth to ease, then waved them through at a diagonal to spare the repaired side. The wheel climbed the far bank without complaint, bindings dark and true. I would have sworn a smith was the only answer, he said. Caleb shook his head. Sister Agnes says try mending before you mourn, Sarah added. And mend with what you have, Ben said. She keeps lists. Then grinned. The scent of sage lifted clean in the rain. The moment imprinted itself on William like a brand cooled on hide. They moved again in a practiced rhythm. 30 yards, halt, tighten, test, advance. When a stone threatened the rim, Caleb called it and William steered aside. When a rut yawned, Sarah raised her hand and the team waited. When wind pressed the flame flat, Ben leaned to shelter it without spilling wax. The laces swelled, then settled. Leather and wood found a shared calm. At the first plank street, William set the brake. The repaired wheel rested easy, bound and sure. He turned to the children, pulled his purse from his vest, and felt the familiar weight of coin. You've earned wages. Name them. Caleb's answer came gentle and we can't take coin for this. William frowned. Work deserves pay. Caleb shook his head. Sister Agnes taught us to help when we can, because someone helped us when we could not. If we sell every kindness, we forget why kindness matters. Sarah lifted their sack. We bought what the home needs. That is enough. Ben pointed toward the lamps along the street. Supper waits, he said. William let the purse fall back against his vest. The refusal puzzled him more than the storm had frightened him. In his ledger's balance settled argument, here stood a line that would not fit a column. He felt an empty place open inside, not loss but room for a different rule. Then allow me to supply candles, flour, nails, he said. Caleb met his gaze, respectful and steady. Help St. Joseph's when you can. Many there have no hands free to work for help. William nodded, heart loosening. I will. The promise surprised him by sounding like relief. Caleb gave a small nod, an agreement between equals rather than a favor taken. It healed something old without ceremony. They started again, turning toward the orphanage before the livery. The wheel kept time with their steps. The town sent out its layered smells, coal smoke, yeast, wet wood, a hint of soap. William walked a dozen paces beside the horses, matched his breathing to a gelding's slow exhale, and found his nerves settling in a way ledgers never granted. He looked at the 3 children, and saw measure, not lack. Caleb guided with spare words. Sarah guarded every step, then carried the small flame like a standard. Their poverty showed in patches and thin soles. Their wealth stood in steadiness, skill and a lesson no ledger could hold. William felt his view shift a degree. Nothing showy yet impossible to reverse. The wheel had been mended with scrap. Something quieter had been repaired as well. The hinge inside a lonely man that decides what truly carries a life forward. Rain drew tight cords across the road, while William lifted the reins and looked back at the 3 children who had mended his wheel. Climb up, he said, voice low to settle the team and the guests he suddenly felt responsible for. Silver Creek is ahead, and there is no sense letting you soak the last miles on foot. Caleb checked each knot one more time and gave a short nod. Sarah passed the canvas sack into the wagon bed and helped Ben scramble after it. They settled with careful balance, keeping clear of the repaired corner while William eased the brake and clicked to the horses. The road flattened, yet water pooled in every hollow. Hoofbeats thudded in a reliable rhythm. Leather creaked. Not with warning but with the sound of honest materials under useful work. Sarah tucked the sack against a bridle bundle so it would stay dry. Ben cupped the lantern under his coat so the flame would not die in a gust. Caleb braced near the rim, eyes on ties that glistened and held their shape. The air smelled of wet earth, oiled tack, damp wool, and a faint drift of yeast from the river street. The team leaned forward with patient strength, lids blinking against rain that beaded on their lashes. "You can sit forward if you like," William said, raising his voice over the weather. "There is room by the box." Caleb shook his head. "We are fine here. If anything gives, we will feel it first." William accepted the judgment and steered toward the high side where old wagon tracks shed water faster. He had commanded crews and bargained with suppliers for years, yet the presence of these small hands altered his approach. He asked the track for permission instead of demanding results from it. Ben peered over the wagon edge. "Do you think the mill will still run tonight?" he asked, keeping the lantern angled toward the bindings. Sarah bumped his shoulder with gentle warning. "Mind the flame," she said. "Sister trusts us with every candle." Caleb smiled at their routine and then glanced forward. "We will be in before the bell if the road behaves." He added, "Sister counts heads at supper even when the pot is thin." The words struck somewhere tender. William had eaten alone for 7 years, using habit as a fence around memory. Clara had laughed at storms and cured sadness with cinnamon tea. Fever took her one winter quiet as frost inside glass. Since then nights stretched long. Work filled daylight with numbers he could balance. Silence waited in every dusk. Now he listened to small voices speak about shared chores and the woman who spent herself like a candle for other people's warmth. A different evening seemed possible, one where talk met the table before darkness settled. "How long have you been at St. Joseph's?" he asked. "Since the spring before last," Caleb replied. "Sister took us from a boarding room where the landlord wanted rent we could not pay after our mother died. She said grief should not be taxed." Sarah lifted her chin. "We earn what we can. The storekeeper pays pennies for sweeping because we return the broom clean. The miller lets us stack flour because we keep the rows even. The schoolmistress gives coins or cookies when Ben delivers letters without smudges." Ben grinned. "Sometimes lemon drops," he said, then hid the smile like a secret. "What do you buy?" William asked. Sarah counted softly on her finger. "Soap, needles, coarse thread, salve, lamp oil when the barrel runs low, hooks for the stove, sometimes nails for the porch, sometimes chalk for slates so the younger ones can practice sums." Caleb added, "And we save a little because roofs do not ask permission before they leak." Ben chimed in. "Sister calls the tin bucket our bank." The picture took a clean shape in William's mind. Their economy measured wealth and usefulness, not weight. He felt respect lean in beside gratitude. A gust shoved the wagon sideways. William steadied the horses with a murmur, and eased the wheels away from a rut. Caleb lifted a palm. "Slow," he advised. William obeyed and felt no sting in surrender. Trust moved between them like a warm current. The repaired rim rolled with a stubborn dignity, the braided laces swelling and then settling as water soaked and then slid away. Sarah checked the knots and gave a satisfied nod. Ben lowered the lantern and watched light glide along the hub as if it were a small river running through brass. "You refused my money," William said after a stretch of quiet. "I keep thinking about that." Caleb studied the road. "Sister says coin is honest when a person works for it. Yet kindness ought not be priced. We take wages for chores because that keeps the home running. We refuse payment for help that any neighbor deserves." Sarah touched the sack. "We have what we need tonight." Ben leaned forward. "And stories," he whispered, delighted by the thought. "We will tell the little ones how a rancher gave us a ride, while the rain tried to knock us flat." William laughed, surprised by the sound. "I am not as grand as rumor makes me," he said. "I have land, horses, and contracts to chase. I also have a house where a chair waits at a table no hand has touched for years." The admission felt dangerous and clean, like cutting a knot instead of worrying it with tired fingers. Caleb's face softened. "Sister says sorrow is heavy until you speak it aloud," he offered. Sarah added, "She says speaking does not lighten the loss, but it loosens the way grief cuts." Ben, solemn now, said, "She makes stew thinner when there are strangers so everyone eats." "That seems the same lesson." They rolled past a line of cottonwoods that threw black lace against a sky pulsing with distant lightning. Silver Creek's lamps showed in a dim chain that curled toward the river bend. The team's steaming breath rose like small ghosts. William adjusted the rein on the near horse, who tossed an ear as if answering the wind. A sag in the track threatened the repaired side. Caleb signaled and William set the brake for a heartbeat, while Sarah retied a stretch that had settled. Her hands moved with precise economy and never hurried. You three manage a shop without walls, William observed. We manage a home that leaks, Caleb replied, unembarrassed. Hammers and buckets go a long way. Sarah smiled. And lists. Then added, cheerful again. And luck, if the pie is not sold out when the baker's wife blames. William promised, I will send flour tomorrow, and realized he meant it. The pledge carried no weight of debt, only the rightness of repair after good fortune. Street noise reached them, softened by weather, a door closing, a cow lowing from a shed, a distant harmonica warming a tune. The wagon clattered onto plank, the wheel held without a quiver. William felt the satisfaction breeders understand, structure answering strain with soundness. Yet deeper than satisfaction rose gratitude, not the kind owed to fate, but the kind earned by small faithful acts from brave children who spent their strength, where it mattered. They turned toward the orphanage first. The building showed a narrow glow at 2 windows and a clean sweep of steps that would sag again by winter. William imagined paint bright enough to make dusk less severe. He pictured Sister Agnes at a table writing lists with a careful hand. He guided the team to the curb and set the brake. Caleb stood and reached for the sack. Sarah offered a private direct smile that gave thanks without bending pride. Then swung down, boots splashing. Thank you for the ride, Caleb said. You got us home dry. William shook his head. You got me to town at all. Silence rested a moment between them, friendly and full. He wanted to ask a dozen questions and had no right yet. He decided questions could wait. Promises would not. I will come tomorrow, he said. There are repairs a good crew can finish before snow. Sarah's eyes brightened, then hugged the lantern against his chest like a prize hen. They stepped back and William lifted the reins. He felt lighter by a measure no scale could capture. As the wagon turned toward the livery, the repaired wheel rolled in steady accord with the horses, a round answer to the day's harsh arithmetic. The 3 children slipped through the doorway, and the lamplight folded behind them like 2 hands finding rest after long work. He paused, listening to rain soften against the eaves, and understood that partnership could be as simple as shared work done without bargaining. Clara had taught that in quieter ways, mending a strap while humming a lullaby, saving scraps for a quilt no one noticed until cold arrived. These children carried the same truth forward without sermon or show. He pictured the ties on the wheel, each strand taking tension so the whole could travel, and saw in that pattern a map for living he still had to do. Tomorrow would begin with oats for the team and a visit to Joseph's before any office door. Think about a time someone's kindness surprised you. Let us know in the comments to keep this story's spirit alive. Rain faded to a soft veil that drifted across the road, each bead catching what little light remained before it slid into the dark grain of the boards. William eased the team down the last slope towards Silver Creek. Hands gentle on the lines, voice low so the horses knew the worst had passed. A thin band of clean gold opened along the west. Puddles caught it and flickered like shaky coins. Smoke rose straight from chimney tops for the first time in an hour. Thunder mumbled far off over the low hills while the town breathed again. Awnings quivered, windows brightened, and the mill's wheel dripped a steady rhythm into the river channel. He turned onto the narrow back street that climbed to St. Joseph's Home for Children. He had ridden by this hill many times and sent hay when asked, telling himself that a filled wagon meant as much as a visit. Tonight the building looked newly honest under the rinsed sky, as if the storm had rubbed it clean. Whitewash tried to shine, steps bowed in the middle and still held. A square of shingles darker than the rest showed a repair made with more will than money. Behind wavy panes, lamplight pooled in a warm rectangle that reached the road like an invitation. He drew the wagon up, set the brake, and half-turned. Caleb had his palm on the repaired rim, reading the give and hold the way a careful hand listens to fence wire. Sarah slid their canvas sack under a bridle roll to keep it dry. Ben tucked the lantern inside his coat, guarding the small flame like a Thank you, Sarah said, voice quiet. Sure, you got us in before the wind turned again. William shook his head. You brought me to town at all, Caleb answered with a brief respectful nod that carried no flattery. Ben hopped down, boots splashing, eyes bright with the simple victory of keeping the light alive. The door opened before their knuckles reached it. Sister Agnes stood framed by glow, sleeves rolled, apron damp, gray hair pinned without fuss. Relief and authority shared her face. Late, but whole, she said. In with you. Then she looked past the children to the man on the seat, and said, with equal steadiness, Sir, gratitude and independence sat together in that single word. William tipped his hat. Your three fixed what I could not, he said. They carried me farther than leather. A corner of her mouth softened. They sleep well when work is useful, she answered. Good night to you. The door closed and warm light narrowed to a seam, then vanished. Silence returned in a kinder shape. William listened to the tick of cooling wood, the horse's slow breaths, the small creak of fresh bindings settling after strain. He had planned a straight path: stable the team, wash, sleep, meet the officials with figures memorized and promises measured. Those numbers drifted now like dry leaves while other images refused to move aside. A boy's hand rising to halt the wheels before a rut. A girl's braid stuck to her collar while her fingers checked a knot by feel. A laughing boy cupping a lantern against rain, protective as any seasoned hand shielding a match. Something in him steadied that no ledger could settle. He clicked to the team and turned toward the livery. Silver Creek looked scrubbed back to itself. The mill's channel ran brown and glassy under a sky torn open to stars. A baker propped his door and let yeast and sugar spill into the street. The scent met a thinner edge of coal smoke drifting from the smithy across the lane. A boy sprinted along the plank walk with a folded newspaper, skidding to a stop when his mother called. Somewhere a harmonica found a hopeful line and stayed with it. William saw the town's ordinary industry tubs tipped to drain, brooms leaning in doorways, a stack of flour sacks the children had helped line straight that very afternoon, and felt the weather inside his chest change a degree toward calm. At the livery, Tom the nightman met him with a lifted lantern and a grin. You rode the worst of it, Tom said. Together they rubbed the team with burlap until coats lay smooth and dark, set oats within easy reach, and drew blankets up over warm backs. William lifted each saddle from the wagon and set it on a rail to air, an unremarkable task that settled him better than talk. You facing the board tonight? Tom asked. Soon enough, William said. You'll do, Tom answered kindly, closing the subject. William surprised himself by smiling without effort. The government office behind the courthouse kept its lamps burning for late travelers. A clerk with a neat mustache took William's card, glanced at the name and waved him to a bench. Two officials bent over a map. A third dried his hat, brim against a sleeve. They called him with efficient nods. He spoke as men do who value work over He described bloodlines that bred agility without fretfulness, laid out a feed program that held weight without waste, named farrier schedules, training routines, saddle fit, delivery timetables and contingencies for flooded crossings. Questions came and were answered in order. He did not oversell. He did not apologize. He let clean detail stand the way a good horse stands, square, balanced, ready. When the chairman closed the folder, he studied William for a moment and said, Award on inspection, this is the right bid. Prepare for rider. The sentence should have crackled like dry kindling and thrown heat. Instead, warmth arrived like a small useful fire, enough to cook stew in warm hands, not a blaze. William shook hands, thanked them, and stepped into the square beneath a sky rinsed clean. Stars pricked the torn cloud. Street lamps burned with cat-like calm, content to make modest circles of safety and nothing grander. He walked toward the hotel while triumph loosened around the edges. In the quiet of morning he had named one purpose. Reach town, protect the cargo, secure the contract. Now another moved beside it, quiet and insistent. He saw a long table at St. Joseph's. Bowls set in 2 rows, bread sliced thin so every child had a piece. He saw Caleb splitting kindling with exact strokes, Sarah smoothing a latch she had mended, Ben showing the smallest ones how to cup a candle so the flame stayed bright. That picture would not yield to ledger. It stood in the same place where he usually kept victory and asked to be considered first. He booked a room, washed the road from his face and sat on the bed with Clara's photograph in his hand. The paper's edge had grown soft with years of thumb and pocket. I got what we hunted, he told the quiet frame, and heard how thin triumph sounded when it met an empty chair. He had eaten alone for 7 winters, training himself not to notice silence. Tonight the habit felt less like discipline and more like a mistake that could still be amended. He stood at the window and watched Silver Creek finish putting itself to bed. A door shut carefully. A horse stamped in a stall. Someone laughed under breath and hushed it. Ordinary consolations worked on him. The keeping of small lights for no grand reason, roofs holding, bread rising somewhere he could not see. He thought of questions he might ask if welcome allowed it. Which steps needed boards? How many blankets ran short? Whether chalk lasted a full term? Whether candles could be spared for a reader who stayed up late? He lay down at last with Clara's image and a square of lamplight on the table. The wheel's new voice still sang in his head, a low dependable creak that promised miles if watched and tended. He understood without drama that the day's second repair had been his own. Pride loosened a notch, purpose tightened, worth measured in something beyond market praise. Caleb's calm, Sarah's precision, Ben's bright courage, Sister Agnes's steady welcome, those qualities had weighed his habits and found them light. Before sleep took him, he shaped a plan. At first light he would turn the wagon back up the hill with Tom's strongest team and ask what the home needed before snow. He would listen without offering trade. Then he would ride for Ironwood, ready the remuda for inspection, and set aside space in the tack room for 3 new saddles he had not intended to buy. Morning could hold both duty and grace. The road had shown him how, and 3 children in patched coats had shown him why. Dawn poured a pale ribbon over Silver Creek while William Hawthorne listened to a town shaking off the night's storm. A broom rasped along the boardwalk. A milk cart rattled, and someone upstairs tuned a hymn into steadiness. He could have pointed his wagon toward Ironwood, with the comfort of a contract won, and a reputation confirmed. Yet his mind would not leave the small door on the hill where Lamplight and Sister Agnes had gathered 3 soaked children into warmth. He washed, changed into a dry shirt, and admitted the plain truth: he was not ready to leave. The cafe stove ticked, windows blurred at the corners, and the owner, sleeves rolled with purposeful neatness, set a mug in front of him before he asked. "You're Hawthorne," she said. "Livery says your team rode clean through the worst." He nodded. "Because 3 youngsters from St. Joseph's mended my wheel." A ranch hand at the end stool glanced up. "Those 3 put half this town right when nails run short," he said. "Sister Agnes runs a tight house on thin means." 2 farmers in a booth spoke low the way neighbors do when they worry together. Paint coming off in curls, porch boards softening, stairs sagging. The owner slid a paper sack across the counter. 2 loaves for the home, she said. From the morning crowd, William felt something lift inside him that had nothing to do with coffee. He finished his eggs, collected his team and drove toward the hill. Daylight made every lack honest, whitewash still bright in places, but chalking at the edges, nails flashing where trim lifted, porch steps bowed into a patient surrender. Yet the bell over the door chimed like a brave idea when he knocked. Sister Agnes opened it with her sleeves rolled and hair pinned, eyes ringed by lost sleep, face clear with welcome. "Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne," she said. "Your children arrived safely." The plural steadied him in an unexpected way. He offered the bread. "From the cafe," he said. "They insisted." She smiled. "We will slice it thin. Please, come in." Soap and coffee scented the hall. Boots stood in paired rows, toes turned out and cleaned of mud. A slate listed chores in tidy chalk: fetch water, fold linens, sweep stair. From a schoolroom a cluster of voices tried multiplication, stumbled, corrected, and then cheered when a row finally held. Sister Agnes led him into a small office containing a crucifix, a sturdy desk, 2 plain chairs and a window looking over the steps that needed a mason's jack. "I want to ask something heavy," William began, folding his hands so he would not grip the chair. 7 years of quiet have taught me what money cannot fix. Yesterday your 3 taught me something I had forgotten. I want to begin the adoption process for Caleb, Sarah and Ben together. She studied him as a careful rider watches a horse's gait, calm, thorough, unwilling to pretend. "Most who come ask for the youngest," she said. "Older children bring history, skill and greed. They know who is missing at a table and sometimes test whether an adult's promises hold as firm as their own." He nodded. "I expect that," he answered. "I will keep them together, send them to school, give them work that matters, beds that hold and patience for misstep. I cannot replace their mother. I can guard their bond." Something eased in her expression. "That is the proper order," she said. "Now the practical road. The county requires petitions, an inspection of Ironwood, references, proof of schooling, and testimony regarding temperance and church. They will speak to your foreman and your neighbors. There will be days when the paper moves fast, and weeks when it does not move at all." William kept his voice even. "The priest knows me. The storekeeper holds my notes. My farrier can recite the schedule I keep. My foreman will speak for my habits. I do not want to buy gratitude. I want it to arrive if it ever does on its own feet. Sister Agnes nodded. Older children do not trade dignity for shelter. They give labor gladly and respect steadily when adults behave as promised. If you stand, they will stand taller. A firm knock interrupted them. Sarah edged in, composed but urgent. Sister. The back latch pulled through, she said. Caleb is bracing the door. Ben has the small ones in the hall. Sister Agnes rose. Come, Mr. Hawthorne. In the kitchen the hinge sagged from a stripped hole. Caleb had wedged a chip beneath the door to keep it square. Ben held a box of nails like a chalice. William asked permission with a glance, pared thin shavings from scrap, tapped them into the hole, reset the screw and tested the swing. The door closed true. Sarah exhaled. Ben's grin flashed. Caleb's brief nod carried a craftsman's approval. It felt like an oath made with wood and steel rather than talk. Back in the office, Sister Agnes drew forms from a drawer with a motion that had traded caution for conviction. We will begin today, she said. Answer questions without heat. Visit only with staff present until the county finishes its work. William signed where she pointed, his name familiar under the pen and newly meaningful. I will send lumber and paint this afternoon, and a mason to lift the porch, he said. Not in exchange for your consent, but because a house holding children should stand sure. Send chalk for slates and oil for lamps, she added gently. Winter nights insist on both. Done, he answered. They stepped onto the porch where the three waited, faces steady and intent. William removed his hat so no shadow lay between his eyes and theirs. I asked Sister if we might build a home together at Ironwood, he said. She has started the petition. It will take time. I will visit. You will keep your lessons. If any of you would rather remain here, I will respect that. Caleb studied him as he studies a river crossing depth, current, then stones. We do not fear work, he said. We fear promises that vanish. I will sign what is needed and stand where required, William answered. Sarah lifted her chin. We stay together, she said. The youngest learns better when the others are near. Ben rocked on his heels. Do you have room for a lantern on your table? William felt his throat tighten. For 3, he said. They shook hands as equals. Sister Agnes stood in the doorway with the cafe bread under her arm, watchful and hopeful. William promised a carpenter by afternoon to shore the porch and a mason tomorrow to reset the middle step. He promised nails for rails, chalk for slates, and paint enough to keep weather outside. He promised to listen before he spoke. Down the hill after storm industry returned with quiet pride. Laundry lines lifted. A hammer rang at the smithy. The river winked between cottonwood. At the courthouse he added his final signatures and felt victory shift shape. The contract no longer looked like a trophy, it looked like a tool grain, blankets, books, lamps, a margin against winter and a cushion for careful risk. Money could steady a house, it could not conjure what he already heard in his imagination, hurried feet at supper, pages read aloud, laughter bouncing the stairs. At the cafe door the owner lifted her chin. Well, we began, he said. She grinned. Then eat. Fetch your crew and keep pace with Sister Agnes. He finished his coffee and wrote a clean list on the back of a feed bill. County agent, livery, lumberyard, orphanage. He touched the pocket where Clara's photograph lived, and felt grief loosen a notch without losing honor. He could carry love that had ended and make space for love that asked to begin. He stepped into bright morning with purpose clear as the air after rain. Adoption would not be charity dressed in Sunday language. It would be joining labor already underway. 3 children had repaired a wheel with scraps, patience and trust. Now he would help repair a future with time, steadiness and love that did not ask to be purchased. The road ahead would wind and the county would pry, yet he felt stronger than pride and lighter than sorrow. He pictured supper at Ironwood, light at every place, and hands passing bread without counting slices. When has a small act of kindness changed your perspective? Share below to spread hope. Late afternoon light slanted across the hill when William Hawthorne returned to St. Joseph's with clean boots, a careful list in his pocket, and a courage that felt quiet rather than grand. He paused at the gate to settle his breath, hearing the yard's ordinary music, a broom whispering along the porch, a kettle sighing in the kitchen, children reciting sums in a wavering chorus that rose and fell like wind over wheat. He nodded. The bell gave a bright jingle that sounded braver than its size. Sister Agnes opened. Sleeves rolled, apron damp, eyes direct and kind. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said. "Come in." He stepped through and the hall's clean soap scent steadied his resolve. He entered the schoolroom at her gesture. Sunlight washed through wavy panes and laid tidy squares on the floorboards. Caleb stood near the stove, watchful and composed. Sarah folded her hands at the table, braids still damp from washing. Ben perched on a bench with the dented lantern between his boots as if it were a small animal that liked to sit close. William rested his palm on a chair back so his voice would not wander. "I came to ask you something that will change our days," he said, meeting each pair of eyes. "Yesterday you mended my wagon wheel and, in truth, mended a part of me. I want to begin adoption proceedings for the three of you. Together if that is your wish." Silence gathered, not empty but full of breath and hope. Ben's face lit so quickly he pressed his lips to keep from shouting. Sarah's eyes brimmed, then she laughed at herself and wiped the tears with the heel of her hand. Caleb studied William the way a trailman studies a crossing, testing depth, current and the firmness of stones. "We have seen fine promises thin out when weather turns," he said. William nodded. "No light vows," he answered. "I signed the first petitions at the courthouse this morning. Inspectors will come. Sister will speak. You will be heard. If you choose yes, I will keep you together, send you to school, teach you useful work and make a home you can trust." Sister Agnes moved a stack of readers aside and sat where both parties could see her face. "Older children carry history, skill and grief," she said, tone steady. "They know who is missing at a table and when an adult's words wobble. Miss Hawthorne has pledged money for repairs and an endowment so lamps stay full and shingles stay tight. That pledge does not purchase you. It steadies the home for those who remain. Your choice must be free." William added, "I arranged lumber, nails, paint and a mason for the porch, not as payment for consent, but because a house with children should stand sure." He described mornings at the barn, chores divided by skill, reading before supper and a traveling teacher until they joined the town school. He pictured Sarah in the tack room repairing straps with a real needle roll, Caleb walking fence lines with the foreman and learning the river gates. Ben teaching a young colt patience with biscuits and a quiet hand. "There will be rules," he said, "but never rules used as fear. We will eat at one table. Your friends here will remain your friends. Sister's door will always be open to you." Ben bounced once on the bench and stopped himself with both hands. Caleb glanced at Sister Agnes. "Will the home stand without us?" "The steps are tired and the paint thin," she answered, "but the porch will lift. The rails will hold. And winter will not steal every loaf. The banker drew terms for an endowment so chalk and candles will not run out by December." Caleb looked back to William. "We remain together." "Always," William said. "Together is the start and the rule." Ben slid off the bench and stood as straight as a fence post. "Could we see our rooms?" he blurted, then flushed and stared at his toes. Laughter cleared the last stiffness from the air. Sister Agnes squeezed his shoulder. "First you answer for yourselves," she said. Sarah turned to Caleb, searching his face the way sailors watch a compass needle when fog thins. He met her look, then measured William one more time and found steadiness there, not show. He drew a breath. "Yes," he said. Sarah nodded hard. "Yes," she whispered. Ben raised the lantern's handle like a salute. "Yes, from me," he added, unable to keep the grin from breaking free. William's throat tightened with a feeling he had kept under lock since Clara's last winter. He touched Sarah's knuckles, rested his other hand on Ben's shoulder and offered Caleb the serious nod a rancher gives a partner. "I will do the papers, the fittings, the shopping and the chores," he said. "You will tell me when I forget how far a small pair of legs must walk." Sister Agnes stood. "I will make tea sweet enough for courage," she announced, and left them with a smile that carried pride and farewell at once. While the kettle hummed, they planned small things that felt mighty, blankets that did not shed feathers, boots that would last, a wooden chest for each child, hooks at 3 heights by the door, a breakfast bell that rang cheerful instead of scolding. Sarah asked for a needle roll with compartments for awls and waxed thread. William promised one with a clasp that snapped true. Ben asked whether stories at Ironwood could include songs. William said he would learn any chorus they taught and would try not to lose the. Caleb asked about quiet and William promised an hour after supper when books ruled the room and even ranchers kept still. Sister Agnes returned with a tin of tea and a plate of bread spread very thin with honey. "Eat," she said, setting the tray down with a clink that sounded like a prayer, answered by ordinary work. "Tomorrow we sign more forms. The county will ask whether anyone pressed you. You will tell them you chose." Sarah smiled through fresh tears. "We chose," she said. Caleb added, "We earned a hearing." Ben vowed to guard the lantern on the ride like a friend who prefers light. William drank and felt warmth spread to a place work never reached. A steady heat rather than a blaze. When William rose to go, the window had already drifted from afternoon toward dusk. He promised to return at first light with a carpenter, a mason and a cart of lumber. He promised a ledger for Sister Agnes showing the endowment in a clean hand. He promised quilts for the wagon, and extra mittens if wind turned sharp. At the door Sister pressed his hand with a squeeze that had weight and blessing. "Homes are built from hours like this," she said. "Keep stacking them." "I will," he answered, and believed him. They followed him onto the porch, the sagging boards suddenly dear because farewell stood upon them. Caleb's nod said trust could begin here. Sarah's smile brightened more than the steps. Ben swung the lantern in a small arc that stitched light across the dust. William descended to the gate, turned back and felt an ache he welcomed, the kind that arrives when a heart grows to fit more names than yesterday. The yard smelled of damp earth, clean soap and the salt of joyful crying. He tucked his hat under his arm and memorized the three faces in the door's golden frame. Street lamps winked to life along the road, making islands of warmth where careful feet met steady ground. He imagined 3 plates at his table, 3 blankets on a rail, 3 voices braiding questions with jokes, while night settled mild upon Ironwood. He understood that love can arrive when called by courage and kept by routine. "We will keep our promises. Together." He lifted a hand in parting and watched the door close on faces he would see at breakfast soon enough. "Have you found family in unexpected places? Tell us your story to inspire our community." 6 months later, Ironwood Ranch moved with a calm rhythm earned by work. Dawn drew a pale stripe over the corrals, while steam lifted from warm horses. The bell on the tack room door clicked each time it swung, and swallows stitched the sky with terns. Caleb took the round pen first, a quiet young bay circling beneath him. He kept his hand low and his seat steady. He asked, waited, and rewarded. The colt weighed each cue, then chose compliance, hips loosening as dust rose soft as breath. After schooling, Caleb walked the fence with the foreman, shouldering a coil of wire and a sack of staples. He reset a leaning post, checked a gate latch, and marked a washout for later. He said little, noticed much, and kept the crew at a pace that finished the needed and saved the rest for noon. Sarah worked by the window in the tack room with sleeves pinned and hair tied back. Her needle roll lay open beside awls, punches and waxed thread. She inspected cinch rings, polished buckles and stitched a lifting strap. She tuned a stiff headstall with oil and patience, until leather bent without complaint. Her stitches marched in clean lines, no waste, no show, only sound repair. She kept a ledger of fixes with dates and riders so the same break did not return. Ben filled the spaces between jobs with light. He fed barn cats, counted eggs, and sang while sweeping the porch so the broom kept time. When a colt shied at a flapping rag, Ben folded the cloth, pocketed it, and walked beside horse and rider until both strides matched. In the evening he practiced letters by the stove and made up songs about supper that sent laughter into the rafters. William still rose before everyone, yet he no longer met silence at the table. 3 bowls and a pot that did not run out shaped morning. He read news from Prescott and small poems from a handbill. He learned to pause so questions could form. When the dishes were cleared he set Clara's photograph where sun warmed the glass. Love that had ended stayed honored. Love that had arrived needed tending. Most afternoons he hitched a steady team and drove to St. Joseph's with supplies stacked high. A new roof sealed tight against storm. Fresh paint bright and trim. A mason had lifted the porch until it no longer bowed under boot. Sister Agnes kept a tidy ledger showing coal, chalk, flour, lamp oil and shoe leather paid with room to spare. Children practiced sums with slates that no longer crumbled. Laughter spilled from the steps without apology. The county finished inspections and placed the final papers in William's hand on a calm morning that smelled of wet sage. The priest blessed the house without long speech. The sheriff tipped his hat and warned Ben not to charm every loose dog into following him home. Lawyers shook hands and left. Peace arrived in the quiet that followed, a tone as steady as a good wheel under weight. Neighbors noticed the change that first showed in William's voice. He said we when planning work and set an extra plate without thinking. He still bargained hard at sales and kept ledgers neat in black ink. Yet the margin listed tasks meant for home as much as market, shelves for books, hooks at 3 heights, a frame for drawings, a slot for stamps, a space for a ribbon. Sarah might win at fair. On Saturdays the family rode to town. They left a sack at the cafe for the owner who had sent bread on the storm night. They brought coal to the smithy for late shifts. They stopped at the school to deliver folded quilts from a sewing circle. Sarah had organized with Sister Agnes and 3 ranch wives. At the orphanage, Ben taught the littlest ones a lantern trick that made them squeal. Caleb fixed a hinge that had waited for a taller hand. Sister and William compared lists and argued cheerfully over who paid last time. Evenings layered themselves with ease. Caleb read from a borrowed history while Sarah stitched. Ben traced rivers on a tattered map with a finger, planning journeys that began after chores. William kept a slim ledger labeled, Graces, where he entered small satisfying facts. A colt stopped crowding, pains stayed clear after rain. Sarah set a neat splice. Ben remembered every verse of a song about biscuits. When loneliness rose it met 4 chairs and faded. He still saw the makeshift wheel in memory, leather swelling under rain, splints taking strain while thunder marched the hills. That repair carried him 1 mile, the children carried him the rest. He did not confuse gratitude with debt. They were not a transaction. They were a family formed by need met with courage and courage answered with steadiness, then sealed by days layered into months until habit turned to belonging. St. Joseph stood secure through the first windy nights of winter, blue paint settled clean against white trim. The bell rope no longer frayed, steps met boots without complaint. Boys and girls who had once counted candles like luck, now measured lessons by the page. Sister Agnes, tireless as ever, slept better and held tea with an unfurrowed brow. She told William he had built the roof, but the children had built the weather that lived beneath it. Ironwood prospered as spring edged toward summer. Colts grew straight, calves came with fewer losses than the year before. The contract brought riders who respected good stock and paid fair prices. But William found pride landing first on smaller victories. Sarah's precise loop of waxed thread, Caleb's quiet seat on a tricky horse, Ben's laugh when a dog stole a biscuit and then sat down to apologize. The ranch held those sounds the way a canyon keeps the echo of rain long after clouds pass. On the evening that marked 6 months they ate outdoors after a light shower. The air smelled of wet dust and mesquite bloom. Coyotes called from a far ridge, then listened. William raised his cup and kept his words short so the night could keep its hush. He thanked the children for teaching him what work is for. He thanked Sister for making space where he had not thought space existed. He thanked the road for breaking a wheel at the right hour. He sat and they let the silence bless them. They were not rich by any measure a banker keeps, though the ranch did well. They were rich in ways that never go stale, time shared, skills passed on, a safe place to sleep, humor that forgives, bread that does not run out. Stories retold because one hearing is not enough. When William closed his ledger that night, his hand lingered as a man's hand lingers on a good horse's neck. He knew what he owned and what owned him in return. He was not lonely, he was home. This story proves kindness creates miracles. Subscribe and ring the bell for more tales from the frontier. Comment where you're watching from. Our Western family wants to hear from you.